I have a story I want to share with you, but I want to preface it with an introduction so you know why on earth I am sharing this particular story with you on Christmas. In the book of Genesis, after God creates the heavens and the earth and all the creatures, we have the story of a garden. You know it, the Garden of Eden. In Genesis, the storyteller recounts they heard the sound of the Lord God walking in the garden at the time of the evening breeze. There was an intimacy with God that Adam and Eve had. They walked in the garden with God. They talked with God. It's like that old song, In the Garden, and he walks with me, and he talks with me, and he tells me I am his own. In the beginning was this intimate conversation with God. In fact, the Gospel of John himself attests to this, but this understanding has been taken from us by translators. As we heard in the Gospel today, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. But that's not accurate. The earliest Latin translators of the Gospel of John understood that Greek word logos is best translated as the Latin sermo, which means dialogue or conversation. All of the earliest translations of the Gospel of John in the first 3 centuries, from Tertullian to Theodore de Beze, translated that as sermo or conversation. It was the Latin Vulgate, a translation authorized by the Pope in 382 AD, which changed that translation to verbum, which is Latin for word. Word is definitive. A word can be easily defined. A word is final, to have the final word. And this was a time that the church in Rome was asserting this rigid control and understanding of our faith. Creeds were literally fought over and formalized, but before all of that, our faith was a little more wild. In the beginning was the conversation, and the conversation was God, and the conversation was with God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being. And the conversation became flesh and lived among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. The conversation became flesh in Jesus. God's eternal invitation and longing to converse came among us, to talk with us, like in the garden, again, to dialogue with us, to cry with us, to laugh with us, to banter and debate together. Conversation became flesh to invite us into deeper conversation with not just God, but with one another, with our neighbors, and yes, even our enemies and those with whom we disagree. He taught us to converse with the rest of creation and to listen to and to learn from the birds. But not just the animals, also the plants. He taught us to listen to the lilies and the trees. And not just the plants, but to listen for God in that still small voice in the wind, and even that stillness of your own breath. God became flesh, the conversation became flesh in Jesus Christ to invite us to hear and see that the divine wasn't so separate from this physical world we live in. He brought this message in a time when religion had harsh lines drawn between sacred and profane, earthly and heavenly, physical and spiritual. But if the divine could be embodied in flesh, that shatters any paradigm that sees the physical world as less than or unholy. He came to invite us to recognize the holy in our midst, in this physical and tangible world that we live in. He himself, Jesus Christ, Was the archetype inviting us to see God and open our eyes to the many ways that God appears right in our very midst? Conversation became flesh to invite us again into that eternal conversation, the dialogue that is at the heart of all life, all of creation, a relationship with one another and the entirety of this creation. And so, with that understanding of the birth of Jesus Christ, I want to share with you a favorite story of mine. You may have heard it before. It's worth reading 1,000 times, and it is Old Turtle by Douglas Wood. They're beautiful watercolors. I wish you all could see it. So go buy the book or borrow it from me and you can see them. Once long, long ago, yet somehow not so very long, when all the animals and rocks and winds and waters and trees and birds and fish and all the beings of the world could speak and understand one another, there began an argument. It began softly at first, quiet as the first breeze that whispered, "He is a wind who is never still." Quiet as the stone that answered, "He is a great rock that never moves." Gentle as the mountain that rumbled, "God is a snowy peak high above the clouds." And the fish in the ocean that answered, "God is a swimmer in the dark blue depths of the sea." "No," said the star, "God is a twinkling and a shining far, far away." "No," replied the ant, "God is a sound and a smell and a feeling who is very, very close." "God," insisted the antelope, "is a runner, swift and free, who loves to leap and race to the wind." "She is a tree," murmured the willow, "part of the world, always growing and always giving." "You are wrong," argued the island. "God is separate and apart." "God is like the shining sun, far above all things," added the blue sky. "No, he is a river who flows through the very heart of things," thundered the waterfall. "She is a hunter," roared the lion. "God is gentle," chirped the robin. "He is powerful," growled the bear, and the argument grew louder and louder and louder. "Stop!" A new voice spoke. It rumbled loudly like thunder, and it whispered softly like butterfly sneezes. The voice seemed to come from, it seemed to come from Old Turtle. Old Turtle hardly ever said anything, and certainly never argued about God. But Old Turtle began to speak. "God is indeed deep," she said to the fish in the sea. "And much higher than high," she told the mountains. "He is swift and free as the wind and still and solid as a great rock," she said to the breezes and stones. "She is the life of the world," Turtle said to the willow. "Always close by, yet beyond the farthest twinkling light," she told the ant and the star. "God is gentle and powerful, above all things and within all things. God is all that we dream of and all that we seek," said Old Turtle. "All that we come from and all that we can find. God is." Old Turtle had never said so much before. All the beings of the world were surprised, became very quiet. But Old Turtle had one more thing to say. "There will soon be a new family of beings in the world," she said. "And they will be strange and wonderful. They will be reminders of all that God is. They will come in many colors and shapes with different faces and different ways of speaking. Their thoughts will soar to the stars, but their feet will walk the earth. They will possess many powers. They will be strong, yet tender, a message of love from God to the earth, and a prayer from the earth back to God. And the people came. But the people forgot. They forgot that they were a message of love and a prayer from the earth. And they began to argue about who knew God and who did not, and where God was and was not, and whether God was or was not. And often the people misused their powers and hurt one another or killed one another. And they hurt the earth until even the forests began to die, and the rivers, and the oceans, and the plants, and the animals, and the earth itself, because the people could not remember who they were or where God was. Until one day, there came a voice, like the growling of thunder, but as soft as butterfly sneezes. Please, stop. The voice seemed to come from the mountain, who rumbled, sometimes I see God swimming in the dark blue depths of the sea. And from the ocean, who sighed, he is often among the snow-capped peaks, reflecting the sun. From the stone, who said, I sometimes feel her breath as she blows by. And from the breeze, who whispered, I feel his still presence as I dance among the rocks. And the star declared, God is very close. And the island added, his love touches everything. And after a long, lonesome, and scary time, the people listened and began to hear and to see God in one another and the beauty of the earth. And Old Turtle smiled, and so did God.